Good morning. Welcome. It's a crisp morning, but a nice morning. And if you're visiting with us, well, you're certainly our honored guest, and we are glad for your presence. And I just can't keep from saying this. You know, we've been studying miracles now for 2 months, and we had a miracle last night, didn't we? UK won the ball game, so real close to one of those living miracles. But anyways, if you watch the game, it's one of those deals that you didn't think was ever going to happen, but it did. So, I trust that everybody's had a good week, and I open the floor up to everyone, and to anyone who has an update on our sick or our bereaved or anything that needs to come before our group this morning. I do have one announcement Ms. Phyllis wanted me to make. There's a sign-up sheet on the bulletin board for the meal for Miss Ruby Lawrence for the funeral meal. So please sign up to bring food because there will be a meal after the funeral. Yes, ma'am. Jeff's in the emergency room with cellulitis in his leg. Here, local? Okay. All right. Yes, ma'am. Okay, Woody Donaldson has been moved to here, the local hospital. He's under hospice care. So let's keep those families and Woody in our prayers. What else? Any more updates? That we need to come before a group? If not, Doug, would you say our opening prayer? Would you say our opening prayer? Amen. Thank you, Doug. Jamie? Jamie, are you up there? Who's up there? Can't see you. Are you following me or do I have to stand here? You'll go with me? You'll play along? All right. Good enough. All right. You may be more excited to know that this probably will be our last Sunday, and we'll finish all the miracles that Jesus done himself. But we're real close to the end, and of course, the end of Jesus' ministry here on earth actually goes, corresponds and goes right along chronologically with the miracles that he performed. So today, we got 4 left, I believe. And we're going to study Mark 10, verses 46 through 52. Mark 10, 46 through 52. All right, and this is the healing of Bartimaeus. He was blind, and really it's a miracle about faith at this time, okay? Mark 10, verse 46. It says, then they came to Jericho. Who's they? Jesus and his disciples, right? Together with a large crowd. So there was a group with him, right? And then, which was, very, very normal at this time, that he has this large brigade that travels with him just to see what he's going to do, hear his teaching, see his miracles and the works that he does. And it says, with the large crowd, they were leaving the city. A blind man, Bartimaeus, was sitting by the roadside begging. When he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. Many rebuked him and told him to be quiet, but he shouted all the more, Son of David, have mercy on me. Jesus stopped and said, call him. So they called to the blind man, cheer up, on your feet. He's calling you. Throwing his cloak aside, he jumped to his feet and came to Jesus. Jesus asked him, he said, what do you want me to do for you? Why are you hollering for me? The blind man said, Rabbi, I want to see. Verse 52 says, go, Jesus said, your faith has healed you. Immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus along the road. All right, so we're traveling, right? I mean, it's still a good thing. Jesus is with his disciples. He's got a large crowd, and good things is happening in his ministry, right? That's where we are right here. And so he is traveling here, and it says that the large crowd was with him and a blind man. Now, we don't know whether this blind man, they call him a beggar, right? Why was he a beggar? Because what? He was blind. And what disadvantage did he have at this time in history that he was blind that made him a beggar? Couldn't what? Yeah, he couldn't earn a living, could he? Because remember, during this time in history, for the most part, people with disabilities were what? They were what? Yeah, they were shunned or outcasts. Exactly right. So here this man was in typical fashion, right? Now today, if we saw a blind man sitting on the side of the road and begging for money, for food, would we just leave him, you think? Probably not, wouldn't we? We are fortunate enough at this time and in the advancement in history and where we are, we don't use people as outcasts anymore like that, right? There's programs, there's opportunities, there's Social Security, there's things to help people and we're glad for that, right? We're glad. I've been terrible to turn up in the off of Amazeable down there this morning. There sat a blind guy begging as we come up the driveway, right? Yeah, but wouldn't we feel like hypocrites, would we? If we had a guy down here at the end of the driveway that was begging for money and it's 42 degrees this morning, right? So anyways, we're glad that doesn't happen, but that's exactly, during this time of history, is the way that these folks were treated. So he was by the roadside and he was begging. Verse 47 says, when he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. First time we've heard that? First time anybody's implored Jesus to heal them, to save them, right? I mean, for the last several weeks we've talked about, and people do this all the time, don't they? They ask Jesus to have mercy on them, to heal them. And once again, this guy shows great faith, right? I can't imagine I don't know if he'd been blind since birth or not. The Bible doesn't tell us. But I just can't imagine not being able to see. Can you all? I just can't imagine that, not being able to see. So, I mean, you just think, I mean, if you just close your eyes, I mean, the closest we come to total darkness is where? In a cave, right? That's as close as we get. Close your eyes. I mean, it's, as everybody has done, it's dark, right? Can't see, don't know where you're going. You can't see the people. You can't see the structure. It's a terrible disability. It truly is. But this guy, he has great faith, doesn't he? Because he just knows, he just hears that Jesus is coming down through there. And he has great faith, and he starts calling on Jesus immediately. And that's what he says. He says, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. Now, many rebuked him and told him to be quiet. Now, why did they do that for? Why did the crowd tell him to be quiet? Making a scene. That's exactly right, wasn't he? Yeah, he was making a scene, I mean, one guy sitting on the side of the road, like, David, Son of God, help me, please, right? And here this great crowd's coming down through here, and they wanted to be quiet, right? They didn't feel the same way Jesus did about here in just a second, did they? They didn't feel that way about this man who was a beggar. I feel like I'm way too loud. Am I too loud this morning? No? Okay. I feel like I'm blowing the place up in here. All right. And that's what he said. And he said, many rebuked him, verse 48, he says, many rebuked him and told him to be quiet. Don't quit making a scene. Shh, stop. You're embarrassing us. But he shouted all the more, Son of David, have mercy on me. Now, let's put yourself back in this man sitting on the ground, right? He can't see. And he thinks he's got how many chances to see today? One. Right? He thinks he has maybe one chance left in life to ever see again. Are you going to be quiet? No. I'm going to be yelling at the top of my lungs, right? Please, Lord. Please. And I'm sure it's exactly the way this guy felt. I could care less what the rest of y'all thought, right? Because I got one chance here to be healed, and this guy knows it. He has that much faith in Jesus, and he's calling on him to help him. Jesus stopped and said, call him. Are we surprised? Are we surprised that Jesus stopped his brigade, his great group that was with him as they're marching on to the next city? And what does this tell us about Jesus again, over and over? Had compassion, didn't he? Absolutely. And he loved these people. And just like he still loves us today. But he did, and he said, call him. So they called to the blind man, cheer up. Now, I'm a little offended by that, are you? They just told him to shut up and be quiet and not be making no scene. And now they're like, okay, Bubby, cheer up. It's going to get better for you, right? So I'm just a tiny bit offended by that when they say cheer up. They was already cheery, right? They was in a good mood. They was walking. They was upright. They could see. And they tell him to cheer up. So I'm just a tiny tick offended by that. But that's what they told him. They said, cheer up. Get on your feet. He's calling for you. Now, how do you think he feels right at this moment? Hopeful? Absolutely. I mean, you think you just got to try to put yourself back, in his situation. It is hopeless to this point. You agree? It's hopeless. And now they said, hey, wait a minute. Get up. Come on. Get up. Come on. Jesus is calling for you. Out of this whole crowd, he wants to see you. Verse 50 says, he said he threw his cloak, or we call a jacket today, and he jumped to his feet, and he came to Jesus. I'd be jumping, wouldn't you? Just fast as I can, even at my size and with a bionic knee. I still would do my best to jump, wouldn't you, Mike? Absolutely. And he jumped to his feet, and he came to Jesus. And Jesus told him, he says, what do you want me to do? Now, do you think Jesus knew what he wanted him to do? Absolutely, right? But he needs him to ask him, doesn't he? He needs to ask. And the blind man said, Rabbi, I want to see. And it was just that simple. Jesus said, go. Your faith has healed you. Immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus along the road. He didn't call upon God this time, did he? We know as different times we've been studying, sometimes he calls upon God, to do this miracle for him. But in this instance, he just says, go, it's done. And it was, right? Because in verse 52, he says, go. He says, your faith has healed you. Immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus along the road. Now, what do we get out of this miracle here? First thing that we need to get out of is how much faith this man had, right? A blind man, a beggar, sitting on the side of the road that had absolutely nothing. And, his group of peers was around him, and he's yelling, Jesus, Son of God, right? Help me. And they want him to be quiet, right? You're making a scene, pal. You don't have no hope anyways. You're blind, you're broke, you have no money, right? That's what condition this man was in. But he had the faith to keep imploring Jesus to help him. And what does it say about Jesus once again? Why did he help this guy? Oops. Should have turned that off, shouldn't I? What does this say about Jesus? What kind of man? What kind of person is Jesus here? Did he get anything out of this? I mean, what was Jesus' pay? What's always his pay? Same thing, right? Dan, you're grinning. What are you grinning about? Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly, he was doing what he was sent to do, right? And did he ever get any pay for doing his miracles? Do you remember? Did he get to stay in the 5-star resort there in Jerusalem? Do you ever remember that happening in the Bible? I don't remember. Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, as far as the accommodations for what he done for these people, there was really none, right? So once again, it's twofold. We see great faith in this man, and we don't know nothing about him really. And Jesus healed him because he felt that love and compassion for him. All right. Any questions or comments?
Jesus was on his way to Jerusalem. Chapter 11, verse 1 tells he arrived in Jerusalem. So he's on his way. This is his last journey. So this is this man, literally his last opportunity. And even though, you think he's got a lot on his mind, he's going to go to the cross, he knew that.
Right.
He knew he was going to be tested, mistreated, and all of that. He could have said, man, I don't have time for this guy. I got too much on my plate, and yet he took time for one blind man.
Right.
As you've been pointing out, that just kind of adds to who Jesus was. He was a compassionate person. He loved people. So, that just kind of adds to the reasoning that he showed himself to be thoughtful of others and not of himself.
Right, as always, right? As always. And Dan's right. As we go into the next miracles here, we're coming to the end of his ministry. And I thought I turned this thing off. Was that my phone or somebody else is doing that? No. That's what happens when your eyes don't do both things at the same time, And so I didn't get it turned off. I'm sorry. Somebody called my name.
My dad was blind, and he said that from time to time he would be talking to somebody, and they would be finished, and then they would walk off, and he would still be talking to them.
Yeah.
So that's probably a Barnabas maybe. He knew there were people, but he didn't have any idea of how many more.
Right.
How many.
Right. And, the author that I study the most here, he makes a lot of good points about this. And one thing he says exactly what you're talking about. He was blind, and there was a large crowd. So there is no doubt that this man was screaming to the top of his lungs, right? Because we don't know whether Jesus is in the front of the 100 or the back of the 100 or the middle of the 100. I don't know how many was in his large group. I don't know what the definition of large was here. But at any point, this man, just what you're talking about here, he had no idea where Jesus was in the group. Or if he done got so far past him, he couldn't even hear him, right? He didn't know that. Yes?
Something that stands out to me is about him, the blind man throwing off his cloak, which probably doesn't seem like a big thing to us, but I think it was the lesson Danny did a long time ago where he had a cloak and talked about how
Right, right. And good point, you know, because you are right. The cloak in this time was what protected you during the night. It kept you warm at night. It's what you slept on, you laid on. It was a very treasured piece of your wardrobe, probably the most treasured.
For a blind man to throw off his cloak at that time, it showed great faith, because if you're blind and you throw your cloak, you're going to get back to it.
Yeah, or you might not ever get it back,
No.
right?
He had the hope and the faith
Yes, he did.
that he was going to be healed there. You know, what can I
Right.
do for you? And he said, I can't see. I want to see. Your faith has healed you. Well, Jesus Christ could see, and he already knew. He knew the beginning from the end. But he also knew when he threw the coat, when he squalled out real loud that he wanted to talk to Jesus, he wanted to say something to him. There was nothing going to stop him. Everybody said, be quiet, you're making a scene. His faith was that whatever Jesus Christ was there, Son of David, here I am, I need help. Help me.
Yes,
Yeah, it was.
absolutely. It was beautiful, wasn't it?
Oh,
You know, the faith that he showed, right?
yeah, the
Absolutely.
faith that was there was so great. And when he was healed, the other people around there saw and heard Jesus Christ, your faith has healed you. Well, this is great faith. Like, how do I get this great faith? I may be following just to see what's going on, but how do I get this faith?
Right. Great example to that crowd, right?
Yeah.
That day. Yeah.
And times before, when he healed, he said, Father in heaven, I know that you hear me, but I have to do this because of the people that's here, so they can see and know that you are with me.
Right. Right.
So when you see all that, everything he done was for a purpose.
For purpose. Yes, that's correct. He just didn't do it for show, did he? He didn't. And to Dan's point, I didn't comment on Dan's point, and it was, and we're going to get into that real soon here. These were the last days, right, Dan? I mean, you know, he was on his way to Jerusalem. We know, and we're going to talk about, you know, as we know what happened. You know, I mean, that's when he was taken in custody, and you know, and his trial began, and you know, and he was murdered on the cross. So. No doubt he had a lot on his mind, and we're going to talk about that today here in another miracle that he done. The next miracle we're going to talk about is in Matthew 21, and it's a fig tree. And I sure hope somebody can help me with this one a little bit, because I have spent a lot of time on this one. And the parallel to this one is a little different, okay? And what he done was a little different, okay? Matthew 21. I got to get there myself. Matthew 21, verses 19 through 27, okay? And this is the fig tree where Jesus cursed the fig tree, okay? And it died. Matthew 21, verse 19, okay? Actually, we'll start at 17. And he left them and went out of the city to Bethany, where he spent the night. Early in the morning, as he was on his way back to the city, he was hungry. Seeing a fig tree by the road, he went up to it, but found nothing on it except leaves. Then he said to it, "May you never bear fruit again." Immediately the tree withered. When the disciples saw this, they were amazed. "How did the fig tree wither so quickly?" they asked. Jesus replied, "I tell you the truth, if you have faith and do not doubt, not only can you do what was done to the fig tree, but also you can say to this mountain, 'Go throw yourself into the sea,' and it will be done. If you believe, you will receive whatever you ask for in prayer." Okay, let's stop right there. As you study this, and what I understand, fig trees, they produce fruit, and then they produce leaves. So Jesus standing afar, couldn't see that this tree, he just figured that it had fruit on it because it had leaves on it, okay? But it hadn't produced no fruit. Now, and then there is a ton of stuff on this, different variations about what the Brotherhood believes in this and how this came about. One person even suggests, did Jesus make a mistake and kill somebody's tree on someone's piece of land? Well, the Bible doesn't say that, does it? I mean, as we drive, as we still drive down the roads, there's still property out there that has trees on it that doesn't belong to Dan Murphy or doesn't belong to Cindy, right? I mean, so, and this could have been right on the road where nobody, and there was a big discussion about that Jesus had made a mistake and killed some person's tree. It was his tree. So let's get through that. The Bible does not lead us or direct us in that way in any manner. Also, we need to understand the word cursed here. The word cursed now leads us to believe in profanity, right? That there was some kind of profanity. That's not what this was at all. This tree, he cursed this tree, or he put he killed it. I mean, it had nothing to do with any kind of curse words. The thing that Jesus was trying to do here was, once again, was talk about have faith. He knows how hard this is going to get for his disciples, right? He knows how hard it's going to be for them. And this is more like an object lesson. Look at this, look at this tree, what I did to this tree. And really what he's saying here is you got to have faith in God. And because he says in verse 21, he says, I tell you the truth. If you have faith, remember there's our word, and you do not doubt, not only can you do what was done to the fig tree, but also you can say to the mountain, go throw yourself into the sea and it will be done. Now, is Jesus literally talking about to his disciples that they'll be able to move mountains and throw it into the sea? Not literally, is he? Because we don't have no recording of that ever happening in the Bible, right? No disciple ever moved a mountain and threw it into the sea. So he's talking about this extended great faith once again that they have to have. Okay. The second thing actually was the nation of Israel. The tree had a deceptive appearance here, right? It was all leafed out, but it still bare no fruit. At this time, the nation of Israel was under these same conditions, right? They had a real pretty appearance for God, but really they didn't have much of a true covenant with God. And so they was appearing outwardly, if you was taking that, what they call it, the 1,000-foot view, it looked like all was well in the nation of Israel, but it wasn't. and the proof is here that they even reject God's own Son, right? They reject Jesus. So same way with the fig tree. I mean, that was the parallel here we're going to use as far as, he's talking to his disciples about this great faith that they're going to need. But also, he's also used this as an object lesson for the tree, to the nation of Israel. Any comments about that? That's a hard one for me. I studied on that as long as any of them that I studied on since I've been teaching about the miracles that Jesus done. And that's probably the most difficult one for me. Because number one, it feels exactly wrong, doesn't it? Right? It feels exactly wrong that because the tree hadn't bare no fruit, Jesus killed it, right? That's not what we've seen all along here, is it? So it was an about face, if you will, from what we've seen and what Jesus has done. But that is what he done, and then that was the lesson that he wanted his disciples was to learn, was to have this faith. And then he tells them, he says, if you have faith, it can be done. And once again, he's teaching as toward the end here, and all this rolls in together as we go to our next miracle. Any questions or comments about that?
Well, I feel that when the faith that you have, and you ask God to help you, and to whatever you ask is what Jesus Christ says will be faith gets greater. And then you say to yourself, someday I'm going to have a family, and I'm going to have a house and a place and that faith runs through you your whole time of being here. And your faith is so great that you are going to work hard. You're going to pray. You're going to do all that's there. And through that faith, it will come to you eventually. It's in God's time and anything happens. But you have to not doubt God. You ask, and He will render to you at the appropriate time what you have asked. And like James says, if you ask amiss, if you've asked for something that is not in your benefit, you'll ask amiss. But if you're seeking that and you believe it with all your heart, it will happen. Now, the mountain moving, well, I look at it like the fellas that move those mountains that takes the coal out of the ground. They see a mountain that's absolutely millions of tons of dirt and rock and all that, and yet they have faith that's cold down there and they move it out. That in itself is just an example of the faith that you have to have. Faith will drive you to do what God wants you to do.
Absolutely.
Faith will drive you.
Right, right. And that's what he's trying to do for his disciples here. He's trying to get them ready. Because as we move into our next section here, restoring a severed ear is our next miracle, okay? And that's Luke chapter 22. And I really wish that I had brought what one of the authors that I studied was. I never heard it said this way as we go into this part of it here. And let's read it first, and then I'll come back and talk about it just a little bit, okay? Luke 22, verse 39. We all know the story well, don't we? This is where Jesus actually, is having this great agony in the garden because he knows what's coming. He knows what's next. He knows that his persecution physically is fixing to start. Verse 39 says, Jesus went out as usual to the Mount of Olives, and his disciples followed him. On reaching the place, he said to them, "Pray that you will not fall into temptation." He withdrew about a stone's throw beyond them, knelt down and prayed, "Father, if you are willing, take the cup from me, yet not my will, but yours be done." An angel from heaven appeared to him and strengthened him, and being in anguish, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat was like drops of blood falling to the ground. When he rose from the prayer and went back to his disciples, he found them asleep, exhausted from sorrow. "Why are you sleeping?" He asked them, "Get up and pray so that you will not fall into temptation." Let's stop there. I never looked at it this way before, but as I was studying this, one of the guys, the author that I was reading, he said, this is where the drum roll starts. He said, this is where the parade starts. He said, this is the greatest story, greatest love story of all time for mankind. And then he said on the other side, he said, it's the saddest story we've ever known in life. Now, put those two together. I mean, think about those running into a funnel together. That's the way I view this. That on this side, for us, it's the greatest story. It's the greatest event that has ever happened to mankind, right? It's just starting at this moment, right now, right? It's just starting. But on this other side, it's also the saddest story that has ever been told. Jesus, who loved people, who helped people, who saved people, and he's going to be treated like this. I wish I had brought it and read it, because it was absolutely the most fabulously written thing that I have ever read about this story right here, okay? But he said it was two-sided. And like I say, I mean, in my world, I think about it, all this pouring into the same funnel at the same time. How can it be that great and wonderful on this side and the saddest, most tragic thing in the history of mankind at the same time? Right? You ever looked at it that way? I really hadn't. I mean, I know the story. I know what it means. I know what happened, right? but I never had viewed it in his terms before, in how he defined it. You know, a drum roll, the trumpets were playing. It's the greatest thing for you and I, right? Why? Why is it the greatest story for us? Salvation, absolutely. But now on the other side, we go on the other side. Why is this the saddest thing, the saddest story that we know of in the history of mankind? Why is it that sad? Yeah. Not only did they take him, what did they do to him? Oh, man. You know, the brutality that he suffered, the pain. And in this story, and I'm off my miracle here a little bit because the story is so important. And I read the whole thing. It's a sermon, is what it is. It's fantastic. And it would take me probably 3 weeks to probably do what this man done in half an hour, you know, on the pulpit. But it was really good. And I really enjoyed it, you know. And I thought about that, you know, that, he said, you got to have a drum roll over here, the parade's starting, you know, we're fixing to be saved. And on this side, we're taking the only perfect human being, we're taking our Savior, and he dies for us, and he suffers great pain, great anguish, doesn't he? So I just had to throw that in. I know we're not really talking about that story today, but we are going to talk about what Jesus done here. But some things that we don't need to leave out on this. Why does Jesus tell his disciples? First of all, Matthew and Mark does not include all the disciples, okay? In their version of this, in their recollection, they only include Peter, James, and John, okay? He doesn't, Luke here actually softens it up a little bit for our disciples, okay? But why does he tell them, pray that you will not fall into temptation? What's happening right this very moment? What's fixing to happen?
Judas has gone to betray Jesus already. They're on the way to the garden to get Jesus. And Jesus knows it. And he's, just think what if they had prayed, how different the story might be, but he knows that they're about to be very tempted to abandon Jesus. They're going to do. And lose their faith, which is going to happen when he dies.
Yeah. Yes, that's right. And it happens 3 times, right? Not once, not twice, but 3 times. It would be kind of like the 3rd time. You know, when you're rearing your own children, you know how frustrated that feels. You know, that 3rd time, you know, you go back and you're like, really? You know, this is the 3rd time. Except he's talking to his disciples that he loves so much, right? So, in order to figure out why, pray that you will not fall into temptation, we need to go back and actually start at verse 35 to help us, okay? It says, and Jesus asked him, and it's talking about his disciples here, he says, when I sent you without purse, bags, or sandals, did you lack anything? The answer was no. Nothing, they answered. He said to them, but now if you have a purse, take it, and also a bag. And if you don't have a sword, sell your cloak and buy one. Now, there's our cloak thing again that you was talking about. And the importance of that is the last thing you want to give up, and you know, if you're one of these people, is give up your what? Your cloak. Absolutely. You know, we done talked about how important the cloak was. And kind of thought it was funny she was on that before I got to this, you know, and I appreciate your knowledge in picking that up there. But also he says, and he was numbered with the transgressors, and I tell you that this must be fulfilled in me. Yes, what is written about me is reaching its fulfillment. The disciples said, see, Lord, here are 2 swords. That is enough, he replied. Now, we're not going to go all into what all this means. That's a whole other lesson, okay? But he was preparing them, right? He was preparing them for where we started reading in verse 39, for this temptation. And he's preparing them. He says, it's time. My time is almost here. The fulfillment has come. So he was, the temptation, I mean, once again, you know, years ago I told you that I studied a guy, and he said that every morning before you come to the church bill, you need to pick up a bag of rocks to take with you. Remember to be telling you that? Did I tell you that? You know, and the reason that he wanted all of us to get a bag of rocks so we'd come in, you know, we could throw them at the song leader because he sung too high or sung out of pitch. The preacher was boring, you know, and the reader, he didn't do a very good job. He got nervous, and that's what this guy that I studied, one of the authors, told, you know. So I never ever forgot that, and I try really hard not to complain, you know, or not to set in that kind of judgment on the people that are leading our service. But same here. I mean, you know, do you have your stone in your hand? You ready to stone these guys because they fell asleep? Are you?
Well, you think to yourself, I wouldn't fall asleep on the Lord.
Yeah.
I don't see how they could be with him all that time and then not care enough to stay awake.
We have a hard time with that, don't we? We have a hard time with a lot of things that disappoint us in the Bible. You know, we can go on and talk about Peter here in just a minute, right? You know, Peter denied Jesus 3 times, right? We have a hard time with that. But, you know, my response to that, where's them other 10 dudes at? Didn't say a thing about them, did they? They wasn't following Jesus, were they? But anyway, we won't get into that this morning. But anyways, but it's you know, do you have your stone in your hand? It's easy for us to sit here and say, oh, man, I just can't believe they fell asleep 3 times, right? You know, 3 times. But they...
I can imagine it. I fall asleep way too easy. and it's really late, isn't it? Midnight when they leave you?
Yeah, it's really...
You know, they've been traveling with him.
Right.
You know, they're probably exhausted physically, and then it says here they're tired from their sorrow.
From their sorrow, yeah.
Because they do know Jesus has been telling them, I'm going to be betrayed and I'm going to die. So they do know that. They don't understand what's happening. They don't want him to do that. And so they are sorrowful. And I can, you know, if you've been crying or you've been upset, that is exhausting, and they fall asleep.
And they are confused, right? I mean, you know, it's time. Jesus is telling them it's time.
They're in the dark, in the garden, in the quiet.
Right.
Probably trying to pray, but they're falling asleep. How many of us have fallen asleep praying? You know?
Right, absolutely. In our own beds at night, right? Absolutely. Good point. Absolutely. So we're not sure why that they fell asleep 3 times, but like I say, I can't throw that first stone. I can't. And maybe you feel differently than that. But they did. But I need to go back and take just a few minutes here. And like I say, this is actually a different lesson. But in verse 42, a very important verse, he says, Father, if you are willing, he says, take this cup from me. What's he mean by that? What cups will he take from him?
On the cross.
Yeah, his death on the cross, right? What's that show us about Jesus? Is he human here?
He's human.
Absolutely, he was. He was human because he knows, he has been foretold. He knows the agony, the shame, the pain, the brutality that he's fixing to suffer. But how many of us can say the second part? We ask for the first part a lot, don't we? Can you take this away from me, Lord? This pain, this anguish, this grief that we got? But boy, this is a mouthful here. He says, the rest of verse 42, he says, yet not my will, but yours be done. Right? I think we miss that a lot in our prayer life, don't you? You know, I think we do, you know, because we want and we ask and we're told to, right? We're told to pray. But, you know, Jesus says here, he says, I understand. He says, if this is your will, I understand this is what's going to happen. In verse 43, it says, an angel from heaven appeared to him and strengthened him. Now, do you think he needed strengthening? Cindy, you shake your head, yes. Why do you think so?
Because the angel came to do it.
Yeah, well, and he did, but why did he need strengthening, though? I mean, you know, the next line here says, and been in anguish. I mean, he was in great pain here, right? Mental anguish is what we're talking about here.
Jerry has brought up a couple times in the sermon that he believes, and I think it's true and right, that the anguish and the sorrow and what he's going through is more about the separation he's about to experience for the first time in eternity with the Father, is being on the cross, and God would have to turn away because he was sin as he was on the cross. And he knew that. This was completely something he didn't understand. You know. Physical stuff is true. The healing part of him definitely was scared
sure. And that's part of it too, right? And it says here that he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat was like drops of blood falling to the ground. That is tremendous tears, isn't it? You know, when you're cut, you know how your blood drips, right? You know, your hands, wherever you cut at. And most of our tears don't fall like that, right? And that big. I mean, that's just how deeply he was moved at this time. It says, when he arose from the prayer and went back to the disciples, found them asleep again for the third time, exhausted from sorrow. In Luke it says here, but in Matthew and Mark it doesn't say that. So, but anyways, he says, exhausted from sorrow. And Jesus implores them once again, says, why are you sleeping? He says, get up and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. Verse 47 says, now we're getting to our miracle. He says, while he was still speaking, a crowd came up, and the man who was called Judas, one of the 12, was leading them. He approached Jesus to kiss him, but Jesus asked him, Judas, are you betraying the Son of Man with a kiss? Now, when I read that, I can't help but stop talking about this just for a second here. We're about out of time. But when I read that, I am thinking, boy, Judas is a complete definition of evil here, right? Not only does he know who Jesus is, but he is betraying Jesus, and he is going to insult Jesus by going up and giving him a kiss, like he still loves him, right? And kind of fires my motor a little bit, right? You know, Judas was just that evil and wicked, right? But that's the way Judas was here, okay?
The sign of love is what he used to betray.
Yes, that's right. That's exactly right. That's a good way to say it. What was just said was, he said his sign of love is what he was using to betray Jesus. Very good. Yes, sir. That's correct. So when Jesus' followers saw what was going to happen, they said, Lord, should we strike with our swords? Remember they had 2 swords? Remember we just talked about that. And he says, should we strike with our swords? So what somebody said before, they're confused about what's going on here, right? So they know that this crowd of people has come to take Jesus, right? And they're confused. Should we fight for you, Lord? And I'm sure every one of them would, right? And before he could say anything, it says one of them struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his right ear. Now, I don't know how many he's had your ear cut off for. I've never had mine cut off. I've nicked his shaving or something. But, you know, I mean, can you imagine the scene, right? I mean, let's think about this. It's dark, and they're standing there with their torches, you know, lit, you know, and now someone takes a sword and whacks off, you know, this guy's ear. Can you imagine? Blood's running everywhere, right? You know, and the crowd's, I'm sure, is yelling and screaming, and everybody's getting ready to have it, duke it out, you know. And what's Jesus do? He says, no more of this, right? He says, stop. We're not going to do this. And he touched the man's ear and healed him. Now, and that was the end. He touched the man's ear and healed him. Now, I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind was everybody standing around there hopefully got to see what happened, right? You know, we went from a guy that his ear was, you know, said it was cut off, so I'm assuming, you know, dude's holding his ear here, right? You know, and Jesus it touches it and heals it, and it's all okay. I just wonder how he feels right now, don't you? Right? I just wonder how the crowd feels right now that has come to arrest Jesus, don't you? It doesn't tell us. It doesn't say, because the story just goes right on, and that's what we're going to do here as we're running out of time, okay? And he touched the man's ear and he healed him. Verse 51. Verse 52 says, then Jesus said to the chief of priests, now we've moved on from our miracle, okay? That's over. I mean, he's healed this guy. He's put his ear back in place, and not a word is mentioned in it, and no more of it. So we're going to read on, though. It says, then Jesus said to the chief priests, the officers of the temple, guard, and the elders who had come for him, he says, am I leading a rebellion, that you have come with swords and clubs and a big group of people? He says, every day I was with you in the temple courts, you did not lay a hand on me. But this is your hour when darkness reigns. Now, why did they not lay a hand on him in the temple courts? He had a big following, right? And they would have been afraid to have done this, you know, inside where everybody could have seen him. Because remember, Jesus is still wildly popular, right? He's got his detractors, no doubt, because they're here to get him tonight, right? But he was wildly popular. He was saving people. People was following him. Large crowds was following him, right? But here, and he's calling them out here, isn't he? He really is. He says, how come you didn't do this, 2 days ago when I was in the temple, when I was at the synagogue, right? Where was you? And and then he says, but this is your hour when darkness reigns. What's our comparison to darkness? Number one, they're in the darkness, right? It's nighttime, it's late. But what else is darkness here? Sin, absolutely. And that's where he was on this. As I read this and studied this, I thought about the man that got his ear cut off. And like I say, I have more questions than answers about this because I'd like to know what he thought. I'd like to know, I guess he was too scared to thank Jesus, right? Maybe he did, I don't know. But I'd like to know what the rest of them thought after they saw that again, and they all knew what they come to get Jesus for because they wanted to kill him.
You know what I thought when the sword was missing, Peter cut off Mount Sea. Jesus Christ told them to sell their coat and buy a sword.
Yep.
Now, each Christian is told to take the word that is the sword. It is a double-edged sword that cuts through, I forget how the Bible says it, but around the tendon separates. This is our sword. Now, if you think about the swords, and everybody says, well, he told them to buy swords, and the sword is what they use, and then he said, oh, we're not going to use swords. But it's two different places. Jesus Christ only said, take your coat and buy your sword, put your Bible in your mind and heart, and use that double-edged sword. It'll get you in and out, and the Lord will take care of you too.
Right. That concludes our marriage. The only one I didn't get to was the one after Jesus' resurrection where 153 fish were caught. And but other than that, we have covered them all, the miracles that Jesus done. I thank you, and next week we'll start a new study.